In the cold emptiness of space, within the metal walls of the Intergalactic War Council station, there was a room, a circular room with a large round table, surrounded by 7 ornate seats, each uniquely crafted to accommodate the diverse physiologies of their occupants. 6 of these seats were filled with the representatives of the greatest civilizations the galaxy had ever known. The 7th seat remained empty. It had been empty for centuries. A plaque on its back read simply, Earth. Ambassador Cale Arden stared at that empty seat from the observation deck above the council chamber, his weathered face reflected in the transparent barrier. Lines etched deep by centuries of cryosleep and the weight of being the last of his kind. The soft blue glow of his neural implants pulsed gently at his temples, counting the seconds of his stolen immortality. "They're ready for you, Ambassador," came a voice from behind. Cale didn't turn. His eyes remained fixed on that empty chair. After 300 years, they finally decide humans are worth listening to again. Ziran, the Varlin representative's aide, stepped closer. The thin, almost translucent being's skin rippled with sympathetic color patterns. "The Council recognizes the value of Earth's perspective. Earth is dead," Kyle said flatly. "I am not Earth's perspective. I'm just a relic they've kept around as a reminder." "Nevertheless," Ziran continued diplomatically, "the threat we face may require unconventional thinking." Cale finally turned, his blue eyes reflecting the artificial light of the station. "Unconventional? Is that what they're calling human thinking these days? I seem to recall reckless, unpredictable, and dangerous being the preferred terms." Ziran's skin flickered a pattern that suggested discomfort. "The meeting begins in 10 minutes. Ambassador, I've been instructed to escort you." Cale nodded and took one last look at the empty seat. 300 years ago, that seat had been filled by Admiral Helena Chen, Earth's last official representative before the end. Before humanity's final, desperate gamble that had saved the galaxy but cost them their homeworld. The halls of the council station were pristine, gleaming with the efficiency that characterized the avant-their aesthetic. All clean lines and practical design, with not a single element wasted. As they walked, representatives of various species moved aside, some with obvious deference, others with barely concealed disdain. Humanity might have saved them all, but that didn't mean they were forgiven for how they had done it. The doors to the council chamber slid open silently, revealing the circular table with its 6 occupied seats. All conversation ceased as Kyle entered. "Ambassador Arden," announced Draxar, the avant-their representative and current council chair. His voice was precisely modulated, as was everything about the avant-their, a species that had evolved to value calculation and efficiency above all else. 4 manipulator appendages were folded neatly before him, while his central eye focused unblinkingly on Kyle. "We appreciate your willingness to join us after such a prolonged absence." Cale approached but remained standing behind the empty Earth seat. "I wasn't aware I had a choice, Representative Draxar." A low rumbling sound emanated from Zell, the representative of the Zalathi hive. The massive insectoid shifted in her specially designed chair, her compound eyes reflecting the light in fractured patterns. "The human questions the council's invitation. Typical." "The human has a name," Kyle replied evenly, "and the human wonders why, after 3 centuries of exile, the mighty War Council suddenly remembers his existence." "Please, Ambassador Arden, take your seat," said Nylera, the elegant representative of the Merid Imperium. Her scaled skin shimmered with bioluminescent patterns that indicated a formal greeting. "We have much to discuss, and your unique perspective may prove valuable." Kale's hand touched the back of the empty chair but didn't pull it out. This isn't my seat. This belongs to Earth and its people. I'm just a ghost. A ghost with valuable military experience, interjected Toran, the militant representative of the Krell Dominion. The heavily armored being leaned forward, the servos in his exoskeleton whirring softly. Experience we may need, given current circumstances. Kale finally pulled out the chair and sat down. The ancient metal, crafted specifically for human physiology centuries ago, felt cold against his back. What circumstances would be dire enough for you to invite the last human to your table? Draxar's central eye contracted slightly, the Avanther equivalent of a frown. We face a threat unlike any we have encountered since the fall of Earth. The council chamber darkened, and a holographic display materialized above the center of the table. It showed a swirling, shifting mass of what appeared to be organic matter, but with patterns that suggested both intelligence and malevolence. We call it the bloom, Nylera explained, her bioluminescence dimming in what Kale recognized as apprehension. It appeared at the edge of Marid space approximately 60 days ago. Since then, it has consumed 3 colony worlds and 2 outposts. Kale leaned forward, studying the hologram. Consumed? Toran's armored fist struck the table. Completely. No survivors. No transmissions after initial contact. Just digestion. It's not technological, added Draxar. Our analysis suggests it's some form of collective biological entity with distributed intelligence. Conventional weapons have proven ineffective. Energy-based attacks are absorbed. Physical barriers are processed. And you think I can help because... Kyle let the question hang. Zell's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of irritation. The human pretends not to understand. The bloom resembles Earth's final weapon. The words hung in the air like a curse. Kyle felt the familiar weight of guilt and anger pressing down on him. The Verdant Protocol was never meant to be a weapon. It was a desperate last resort after you all abandoned Earth to the Scourge. A desperate resort that worked, Toran pointed out, at great cost, but it worked. The Scourge was eradicated. Along with Earth and most of humanity, Kyle added bitterly. Nylera's scales rippled in a pattern suggesting conciliation. No one denies the sacrifice humanity made. Ambassador. But now we face a similar threat. And you are the only one with first-hand knowledge of the biological countermeasures your people employed. Kale sat back, his eyes moving from one alien face to another. You want me to create another Verdant Protocol? To unleash another planet-killing bioweapon? We want you to help us understand what we're facing. Draxar clarified. Your expertise in unconventional warfare strategies might provide insights our more traditional approaches lack. My expertise, Kale repeated with a hollow laugh. I was a mid-level strategic officer who happened to be off-world when the protocol was activated. I didn't design it. I wasn't even consulted. But you lived it. Ziran spoke up from where he stood at the periphery of the room. All eyes turned to the aide, who seemed to shrink under the sudden attention, but continued. You witnessed humanity's last stand. You carried their legacy. That perspective alone is valuable. Silence fell over the chamber. Kyle looked around at the council members, noting the mixture of hope, skepticism, and desperation in their alien expressions. Then his gaze fell upon the plaque on his chair. Earth, a dead world with one living representative. Show me everything you have on this bloom, he finally said. And I mean everything. No political filtering, no strategic omissions. If you want humanity's help, You get humanity's condition. Complete transparency. Draxar and Torin exchanged glances, while Zell's compound eyes seemed to narrow. Agreed, Nylera said before anyone could object. You shall have full access to our data. Kale nodded, settling deeper into Earth's chair. For the first time in 3 centuries, a human voice would be heard in the War Council. Whether they would truly listen remained to be seen. The meeting continued for hours, as each representative shared their civilization's encounters with the Bloom. Kyle listened intently, asking occasional questions that often seemed tangential, but gradually revealed a pattern of understanding that the others had missed. It's not just consuming, he finally said, interrupting Toron's detailed account of a failed military engagement. It's learning. All eyes turned to him. Explain, Draxar demanded. Kale stood and approached the holographic display, manipulating it with practiced gestures. Look at the attack patterns. The first colony it hit, it was almost random, exploratory, but each subsequent attack has been more efficient, more targeted. He highlighted specific sections of the display. It's adapting to your defenses, learning from each encounter. This isn't mindless consumption. It's calculated assimilation. Like the Scourge, Zell observed, her mandibles clicking thoughtfully. No, Kyle shook his head. The Scourge was destructive, but predictable. This is something else. Something worse. The council chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Nylera was the first to speak. If it's learning from each encounter, then conventional military responses will only make it stronger. Precisely, Kale confirmed, which is why you need to stop attacking it directly. Torin's armored fist struck the table again. And do what? Wait for it to consume us all? No, Kale's voice was firm. You need to communicate with it. Disbelieving murmurs spread around the table. Communicate? With that. Draxar's central eye dilated in what Kale recognized as the avant-there expression of disbelief. Our best xenolinguists have detected no response to any communication attempts because you're trying to communicate on your terms. Kale explained. This entity doesn't think like us, any of us. It processes information through consumption. To communicate, you need to give it something to consume that carries your message. You suggest feeding it information? Zell's mandibles clicked rapidly in alarm. Give it more knowledge to use against us? Not information, Kyle clarified. Understanding. The meeting adjourned shortly after, with each representative needing time to consult with their governments about Kyle's unorthodox proposal. As the others filed out, Ziran remained behind, approaching Kyle, who stood staring at the holographic representation of the Bloom. They fear your methods, Ambassador, the Varlan aide said quietly. They remember Earth's final solution. Kale didn't look away from the hologram. They should. The Verdant Protocol wasn't just a weapon. It was humanity's judgment on a galaxy that abandoned them. Yet now you propose communication rather than destruction, Ziran observed. Why? Kale finally turned to face the Varlan, his expression unreadable. Because I've had 300 years to think about what we did wrong. Humanity's mistake wasn't the protocol itself. It was activating it out of desperation rather than understanding. And you believe understanding this Bloom is possible? I believe we have to try, Kyle replied. Otherwise, we're just repeating history. And I've seen how that ends. As Kyle returned to his quarters that evening, he felt the weight of centuries pressing down on him. The neural implants at his temples pulsed more rapidly, responding to his elevated stress levels. He activated the privacy field and then accessed his personal data storage, a quantum crystal embedded near his heart. The only place he trusted to keep humanity's final secrets. A holographic journal appeared before him, displaying entries dating back 3 centuries. He navigated to the final days before Earth's fall, to the classified briefings he had received as a strategic officer stationed on Mars' colony. "Project Verdant," he murmured, scanning the technical specifications that few humans had ever been privy to. What the Council didn't know, what no one in the galaxy knew, was that the Verdant Protocol had never been meant as a weapon at all. It was designed as a communication system, a way to share human consciousness with other life forms through controlled biological interfaces. But in their desperation, facing the relentless advance of the Scourge and abandoned by their supposed allies, Earth's leaders had weaponized it. They had transformed a tool of understanding into an instrument of devastating retaliation, releasing self-replicating nanobiological agents that interfaced with the Scourge's hive mind and introduced a fatal recursive logic loop, essentially a biological version of a computer virus. The Scourge, unable to process the paradoxical information injected into its collective consciousness, had begun to devour itself. But the protocol hadn't stopped there. It had spread, consuming Earth itself and nearly all of humanity with it, leaving only those few who, like Kale, had been off-world and protected by quarantine measures. A final victory that tasted of ash and emptiness. Kale closed the holographic display and sat in darkness, remembering the faces of colleagues, friends, family, all gone, all sacrificed in humanity's final, desperate act of defiance. Was it worth it? He whispered to the empty room. The question that had haunted him for 3 centuries. He had no answer. But perhaps, with this new threat, he might find redemption for humanity's legacy. Not through another act of spectacular destruction, but through understanding, the very purpose for which the Verdant Protocol had originally been designed. The next morning, Kale returned to the council chamber to find the representatives already gathered, their expressions grim. "We have received reports overnight," Draxar announced without preamble. "The Bloom has accelerated its expansion. 3 more Marid outposts have been lost." Nylera's bioluminescent patterns pulsed with distress. "Thousands of my people. Gone. And you still propose communication rather than annihilation?" Toran demanded, turning to Kyle. "The time for talk is past. We need the Verdant Protocol." Kale stood firm. The Verdant Protocol is not an option. It would likely destroy not just the Bloom, but everything it has touched, including your lost outposts, and possibly much more. "If that is the price of survival," Toran began. "It's not just about survival," Kyle interrupted. "It's about understanding. The Bloom is intelligent in ways we can't comprehend yet. Destroying it without understanding it would be repeating humanity's mistake." "A mistake that saved the galaxy," Zell pointed out, her compound eyes fixed on Kyle. "At what cost?" Kyle countered. "Earth? Humanity? Is that the price you're willing to pay again? Which of your homeworlds are you offering up this time?" A tense silence fell over the chamber. "What do you propose, Ambassador?" Nylera finally asked, her voice soft but steady. Kale approached the holographic display, bringing up the latest data on the Bloom. "I propose we use a modified version of the original Verdant Protocol, not the weaponized version that destroyed Earth, but the communication system it was designed to be." "Impossible," Draxar stated flatly. "The original Verdant technology was lost with Earth." Kale touched the area over his heart, feeling the quantum crystal pulse beneath his skin. Not entirely lost. All eyes in the chamber fixed on him with newfound intensity. "You possess the original Verdant technology?" Toran asked, his voice a mixture of hope and suspicion. "I possess the specifications," Kale clarified. "Enough to recreate a limited version, one designed specifically to interface with the Bloom's biology." "To what end?" Zell demanded. What would you communicate to this consumer of worlds? Understanding, Kyle replied simply. We would show it what it means to be us, all of us. Human. Avanther. Zelathi. Marid. Krell. Vorlon. We would give it our perspective, our experiences, our empathy. Empathy? Toran scoffed. You would appeal to the conscience of a mindless devourer? Not mindless, Kale corrected. Different. Its intelligence is distributed, collective. It experiences existence through consumption and assimilation. It doesn't destroy out of malice, but out of the need to understand, a need it can only fulfill through its own biological processes. And if your attempt at communication fails? Draxar asked, his central eye fixed unblinkingly on Kale. Then we still have the option of full deployment, Kyle admitted. A weaponized version as a last resort, but we try understanding first. The council debated for hours, arguments growing heated at times. Toran advocated for immediate military action. Zell expressed skepticism about communicating with a being that had shown no interest in dialogue. Draxar calculated probabilities of success with characteristic Avanther precision, finding them unsatisfactorily low. It was Nylera who finally tipped the balance. My people have already paid the heaviest price, she said, her scales dimming to a mournful blue. If there is even a small chance to end this without further bloodshed, we must take it. And if it fails, Toran pressed, if the bloom continues to advance, then we will have lost nothing but time, she replied, and gained the moral certainty that we tried peace before resorting to destruction. Eventually, a fragile consensus was reached. They would attempt Kale's communication protocol first, with preparations for more aggressive measures should it fail. Kale was granted access to the Council's most advanced biological research facilities to recreate the original Verdant technology. As the meeting adjourned, Xeron approached Kyle again. The Council underestimates the risk you're taking. Ambassador. Kyle raised an eyebrow. How so? The original Verdant protocol required a human consciousness as the foundation of its communication matrix. Xeron said quietly. You didn't mention that part to them. Kale's expression hardened. You seem remarkably well informed for an aide. Information is the currency of diplomacy, Xeron replied, his skin rippling with patterns too complex for Kale to interpret. The question remains, who will provide the consciousness for your communication attempt? Kyle held the Varlan's gaze steadily. Who do you think? Understanding dawned in Xeron's multifaceted eyes. You. But the process nearly killed the test subjects during the original development. Nearly, Kale agreed. And this time, the interface will be more refined. The risk is acceptable. To save the species that abandoned yours? Kale smiled thinly. To honor what humanity was meant to be. Not destroyers, but connectors. Bridges between different forms of consciousness. Noble, Xeron observed, but the Council won't approve if they understand the full risk to you. Then it's fortunate they don't need to know all the details, Kale replied. Some aspects of the process are, after all, proprietary human technology. Over the following weeks, Kyle worked tirelessly in the biological research laboratories aboard the Council station. The original Verdant specifications required significant adaptation to work with the Bloom's unique biology. And without a team of specialized human scientists, much of the burden fell on Kale himself. The Council representatives visited periodically, monitoring his progress with varying degrees of skepticism and hope. Draxar analyzed each development with cool Avanther precision. Toran watched for any sign that the project might be weaponized more effectively. Zell remained dubious, but contributed valuable insights from the Zalathi hive's vast biological knowledge. Nylera provided samples from the affected Merit outposts, tiny fragments of the bloom collected at great risk by her people's scouts. These proved invaluable for understanding the bloom's basic structure and devising an interface protocol. Only Ziran seemed to truly comprehend what Kale was attempting, and the personal price it would demand. The neural load will be substantial. The Varlin observed one evening as they examined the prototype interface device, a delicate web of nanobiological filaments suspended in a nutrient solution. Your implants were not designed for this kind of integration. They'll manage, Kyle replied, not looking up from his work. They've kept me alive for 3 centuries. A few more hours is all I need. Is that what you believe? A few hours to save the galaxy? Kyle finally looked up, his eyes reflecting the blue glow of the laboratory equipment. A few hours to deliver humanity's final message, to show the galaxy what we were truly meant to be. As the work neared completion, reports continued to arrive of the bloom's advance. It had now consumed 5 Marid worlds and had begun to encroach on Zalathi territory. The pressure on Kyle intensified, with Toran in particular advocating daily for abandoning the communication attempt in favor of weapons deployment. We're running out of time. Human, the Krell representative growled during one particularly tense council session. While you tinker with your communication device, worlds are being devoured. It's not tinkering, Kale replied evenly. It's creating a bridge between fundamentally different forms of consciousness. It requires precision. Precision, Toran scoffed. Your species was never known for precision, only for desperate, destructive gambles. That's unfair, Nylera interjected, her scales flashing with indignation. Ambassador Arden is attempting something unprecedented. Something that may fail, Draxar pointed out dispassionately. The probability calculations remain unfavorable. Some things can't be calculated, Kyle said quietly. Understanding, empathy, connection. These were human specialties once, before desperation turned us into the destroyers you remember. Pretty words. Zell's mandibles clicked dismissively. But the bloom continues to advance while we debate philosophy. One more day, Kale promised. The interface will be ready for deployment tomorrow. The council reluctantly agreed to the extension, though Toran made it clear that military options would be implemented immediately if the communication attempt failed. That night, as Kale made final adjustments to the interface device, Ziran entered the laboratory unannounced. The council doesn't know the full extent of what you're planning, the Varlin said without preamble. Kale continued working, not looking up. They know enough. They know you intend to attempt communication. They don't know you plan to sacrifice yourself in the process. Kale's hands paused briefly over the delicate neural web. It's not a sacrifice. It's a completion. He finally looked up at Ziran. 300 years is a long time to be a ghost, wandering empty halls as the last reminder of a dead world. There could be other solutions, Ziran insisted, other carriers for the communication protocol. None with the necessary neural architecture, Kale replied. None with the memories of Earth, the understanding of what humanity was meant to be, and none with the lifetime of guilt that needs redemption. Ziran's skin rippled with complex emotions. You seek absolution for Earth's final act. I seek to finish what we started, Kyle corrected. The Verdant Protocol was meant to connect, to bridge, to understand. Tomorrow, it finally will. The next morning, the council gathered in the station's secure deployment chamber. The prototype interface device had been installed in a specially designed pod that would be launched toward the nearest concentration of the bloom. What the council didn't know was that Kale had made certain modifications to the deployment plan overnight. "The device is ready," he announced, as the representatives took their positions around the control console. "Once deployed, it will establish contact with the Bloom and begin the communication protocol." "And how long before we know if it's successful?" Draxar inquired, his manipulator appendages poised over the console's controls. "Minutes, perhaps," Kyle replied. "The Bloom's collective intelligence should respond quickly once the interface is established. And if it doesn't respond," Toran pressed. "Then we proceed with the alternative," Kale conceded. "But it will respond. It wants to understand as much as it wants to consume." The final preparations were made. The pod was loaded into the launch tube, its systems checked and rechecked. As the countdown began, Kale moved subtly toward the airlock adjacent to the launch tube. 10 seconds to launch," Draxar announced. Ziran caught Kyle's eye from across the room, understanding dawning in the Varalen's expression. 5 seconds. Kale nodded once to Ziran, a silent farewell. 3, 2. In a swift, practiced motion, Kale activated his neural implants at maximum capacity, temporarily disrupting the chamber's security systems. The momentary confusion was all he needed to slip through the airlock and into the launch tube. "What is he doing?" Zell's alarmed voice came through the communication system. "Stop the launch!" "Too late," Kyle replied calmly, sealing himself inside the pod with the interface device. "The protocol requires a human consciousness as the foundation. It always did." "Ambassador, this is not necessary," Nylera pleaded. "We can find another way." "There is no other way," Kyle said as the pod systems came online around him. "This is what humanity was meant to do. Bridge the gap between different minds, different ways of being. Not destroy, but connect." "Override the launch!" Toran commanded. "I've locked out the controls," Kyle informed them, feeling the neural filaments of the interface device beginning to extend toward him, seeking connection. This is humanity's final gift to the galaxy. Not destruction, but understanding. The pod launched, accelerating rapidly away from the station toward the advancing edge of the Bloom. Inside, Kyle felt the delicate neural web of the interface device making contact with his implants, establishing the connections that would translate his consciousness into a form the Bloom could assimilate without destroying. Pain lanced through him as the integration began, but he had expected that. What he hadn't fully anticipated was the flood of memories that came with it. Earth as it had been, green and vibrant, the faces of those he had lost, the desperate final days as the scourge advanced and the verdant protocol was weaponized against everyone's better judgment. The pod approached the Bloom's perimeter, a swirling mass of organic matter that seemed to pulse with eerie intelligence. Tendrils extended toward the small vessel, drawn by the unique neural signature of the interface device, and the human consciousness now integrated with it. "I am Kale Arden," he transmitted through the interface as the Bloom's tendrils made contact with the pod's exterior. "Last representative of humanity, I bring understanding." The Bloom's response came not in words, but in sensations. Hunger, curiosity, an alien form of intelligence that experienced reality through consumption rather than observation. It wanted to know, to understand. But its only method was to devour. "There is another way," Kyle communicated, opening his mind fully to the interface as the Bloom began to envelop the pod. "I will show you." Through the neural web, Kale shared not just his own consciousness, but the accumulated knowledge and experiences of humanity that he had carried for 3 centuries. The beauty of Earth's forests and oceans, the complexity of human art and music, the capacity for empathy that had defined humanity at its best, the understanding that consumption without preservation ultimately leads to emptiness. The pain intensified as the interface worked at maximum capacity, translating these abstract concepts into forms the Bloom could comprehend. Cale's neural implants glowed white-hot, pushed far beyond their designed limitations, but he maintained the connection. We were destroyers once, he communicated through waves of agony. We destroyed ourselves trying to destroy a threat we didn't understand. Don't repeat our mistake. There is another way to know, to grow, to be. The Bloom's response shifted, curiosity overtaking hunger as it processed this new form of understanding. It had never encountered a consciousness that offered itself willingly, that sought to share rather than resist. Back on the council station, the representatives watched in stunned silence as the Bloom's advance halted. The swirling mass of organic matter ceased its expansion, concentrating instead around the tiny pod that contained humanity's last ambassador. "What's happening?" Zell demanded, her compound eyes fixed on the display. "He's communicating with it," Ziran explained quietly, offering understanding instead of resistance. "The Bloom's expansion has stopped completely," Draxar confirmed, his manipulator appendages moving rapidly over the sensor controls. "It appears to be reconfiguring." On the pod, Kyle felt his consciousness beginning to fade as the interface taxed his neural implants beyond their capacity. But he could also feel the Bloom's response, a gradual shift from hunger to comprehension, from consumption to coexistence. "Remember Earth," were his final words through the interface. "Remember what we learned too late." The neural web flared with one last surge of activity, transmitting the entirety of Cale's memories, knowledge, and humanity's final lesson. That understanding, not destruction, was the true path to survival. Then the pod signal went silent. For 3 days, the council monitored the Bloom anxiously. It remained concentrated around the area where Cale's pod had been absorbed, neither advancing nor retreating. Sensors detected complex energy patterns, suggesting intense activity, but of a nature unlike its previous consumption behavior. On the 4th day, the Bloom began to move, not toward inhabited systems, but away, retreating from Marid and Zalathi space toward the empty regions beyond the galaxy's edge. "It's leaving," Nylera observed, her scales glowing with cautious hope. Ambassador Arden succeeded, at the cost of his life. Toran noted, a newfound respect in his voice. "A warrior's end." "Not a warrior," Ziran corrected. "A bridge." He gave the Bloom what it truly sought, understanding, and in doing so, changed its nature. As the weeks passed, the Bloom continued its retreat until it vanished beyond the reach of even the most advanced sensors. The threat had passed, not through destruction, but through communication, through the final gift of humanity's last representative. In the council chamber, the empty Earth chair remained, but now a second plaque had been added below the first. It read simply, "Kyle Arden, who reminded us that understanding transcends destruction." The council convened for its first regular session since the crisis, the representatives taking their customary seats around the circular table. The Earth chair remained empty, as it had for centuries, but now it stood as a symbol not of a lost civilization, but of a profound legacy. "This council has existed for millennia to coordinate our collective defense," Draxar began formally. "Yet it took a human, the last of a species we had written off as reckless destroyers, to remind us that true security comes not just from strength, but from understanding." "The human sacrificed himself," Zell acknowledged, her mandibles moving in the Zalathi gesture of respect, for species not his own, for a galaxy that had forgotten his kind. Not forgotten, Nylera corrected, her scales shimmering with emotion. Misunderstood. We remembered Earth's destruction, but forgot the connection and empathy that defined humanity before desperation drove them to their final act. A mistake we must not repeat. Toran agreed. His normally aggressive stance softened. Strength without understanding is merely brutality. Ziran, who had been formally elevated to representative status following his role in the crisis, looked at the empty Earth chair. Ambassador Arden once told me that he carried humanity's legacy not as a burden, but as a promise. A promise that someday the galaxy would remember humans not as the species that destroyed themselves in a final desperate act, but as the ones who taught us all how to truly connect across the boundaries of different minds. A promise fulfilled, Draxar acknowledged, but at great cost. All understanding comes at a cost, Ziran replied. The question is whether we have learned enough to make that cost worthwhile. The council members fell silent, each contemplating the empty chair and the legacy it now represented. Finally, Nylera spoke. I propose that the Earth seat remain empty, not as a memorial to a lost world, but as a reminder of the perspective it represented, the willingness to bridge understanding, to connect rather than destroy, to sacrifice for a greater good. Seconded, said Zell, surprising everyone with her immediate support. The council is in agreement then. Draxar concluded. The Earth seat shall remain, and with it, the legacy of Kyle Arden and humanity, not as warriors or destroyers, but as teachers of understanding. As the session continued, discussion turning to other matters of galactic governance, the empty chair stood as a silent witness, a reminder that in a universe of diverse minds and conflicting perspectives, the greatest strength comes not from the power to destroy, but from the courage to understand. In the vast emptiness beyond the galaxy's edge, the entity once known as the Bloom continued its journey, transformed by its encounter with humanity's final representative. Within its collective consciousness, the memories and experiences of Kale Arden lived on, the green fields of a planet called Earth, the complex emotions of its long-lost inhabitants, and the profound realization that true knowledge comes not from consumption, but from connection. It would not return to the galaxy, not as a devourer of worlds. Instead, it would seek its own path, carrying with it the last gift of humanity, the understanding that different forms of consciousness need not destroy each other to coexist, that bridges can be built across even the most alien of divides. And in the quiet moments between the stars, something that had once been Kale Arden found a strange kind of peace, no longer the ghost of a dead world, but a bridge between fundamentally different ways of being, fulfilling at last the promise that humanity had made to the universe before desperation turned them from connectors to destroyers. The empty chair in the council chamber would remain empty for centuries to come, a symbol not of absence, but of potential. The potential for understanding across differences, for communication instead of conflict, for bridges instead of barriers. Every alien war council has one empty seat, for Earth, not as a memorial to destruction, but as a promise of connection. Not as a reminder of what was lost, but as a beacon for what might yet be found again. In time, perhaps that seat would be filled once more. But until then, its emptiness spoke volumes about the species that had once occupied it, a species that, in its final moment, had chosen to be not the destroyer of worlds, but the builder of bridges. The legacy of Earth, preserved in an empty chair, echoing through the decisions of the Council for generations to come. Understanding transcends destruction. Connection outlasts conflict. Empathy is the true final frontier. The last human had shown them the way. The rest of the journey was theirs to make.